February 3rd, 2026, 2:17. Gulf Standard Time, North Arabian Sea, 350 nautical miles southeast of Bandar Abbas. The radar contact appeared for exactly 4 seconds. Then it vanished. On the Combat Direction Center of the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, the sudden silence was worse than an alarm. The surface search console showed nothing abnormal now, just dark water and commercial traffic lanes, but the operator didn't look away. He froze, fingers hovering above the trackball. "Say again," the tactical action officer said, already standing. The operator swallowed. "Possible low-profile surface contact, bearing 086, speed uncertain." It dropped below threshold. No one spoke. Outside, the carrier strike group cut through black water under emission control. No radar sweeps, no deck lighting. The sea was calm in a way that made sailors uneasy. Too calm, too quiet, like something was being held back. If the contact was real, it meant someone had come inside the exclusion ring without being seen. And if that someone was Iranian, there would be no room for mistakes. The Carrier Strike Group 8 was the most powerful naval formation on the planet. A nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 2 guided missile cruisers, 3 destroyers, and a submarine no one talked about. Against it, Iran had no navy that could survive a direct confrontation. But they didn't need one. They needed proximity, and they had spent years learning how to get close without being noticed. 2:19. The second contact appeared, closer this time, not on radar, on infrared. A faint heat signature skimming the surface, moving slow. Too slow for a missile, or too deliberate for debris. Possible swimmer delivery vehicle? The watch supervisor said quietly. That phrase carried weight. It meant commandos, not sailors. It meant intent, not accident. The Eisenhower's captain, Captain Daniel Reeves, was on the bridge within seconds. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. "Confirm hostile intent," he said. No one could. Not yet. And that uncertainty, the space between detection and confirmation, was where wars started. At 2:21, sonar picked up a second anomaly, then a third, then nothing. The contacts weren't advancing anymore. They were holding position. At 2:26, a diver broke the surface, only for a second, long enough for a sailor to see the outline of a helmet before the water closed again. That was enough. "Hostile presence confirmed," Captain Reeves said. The word attack wasn't spoken, but everyone heard it anyway. If you want to see how the U.S. responds in real time, subscribe and hit the bell. Comment below. What would you do if this were your ship? The contacts had stopped moving, not retreating, not advancing, just holding. Someone, somewhere beneath the surface, had frozen in place. This wasn't normal for an assault. Attackers didn't pause. They didn't hesitate, unless they were waiting for something, or listening. Washington, D.C., 1852. Eastern Time. The Situation Room screens showed grainy thermal overlays and maritime plots. No explosions, no red flashing warnings, just quiet data and restrained voices. "Are we under attack?" the National Security Advisor asked. The answer mattered more than any order. "We don't know," the Joint Chiefs Chairman replied. But someone is testing our perimeter." The President leaned forward. "Testing how?" No one answered immediately, because everyone in the room understood the implication. If Iranian commandos were close enough to touch a U.S. aircraft carrier, then deterrence had already failed once. The question now was whether it would fail again. Back at sea, Marines armed with non-lethal grenades and suppressed weapons moved to access points no civilian would ever see. Floodlights remained off. Helicopters stayed grounded. Everything was being done quietly, because noise would force Iran to decide whether this was still a probe or the opening move of something irreversible. Tehran 10:01 local time inside a guarded facility west of the capital. Senior officers of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy listened to a secure line. The voice on the other end was calm. "Our teams are in position," the field commander said. "No engagement, awaiting instruction." The room remained quiet. This was never supposed to be loud. The objective was not destruction. It was signaling. Iran had no illusions about sinking an American carrier. The firepower required didn't exist in their inventory. The political cost would be unthinkable. But getting close enough to prove they could, that was worth the risk. Because proximity was its own kind of power. 228 on the Eisenhower, Marines armed with suppressed weapons moved to access points no civilian would ever see. Floodlights remained off. Helicopters stayed grounded. Standard doctrine allowed immediate lethal force. Captain Reeves didn't authorize it. Instead, he ordered something far more dangerous. Contain, and do not engage unless fired upon. The bridge went silent. This was not weakness. It was calculation. If the U.S. killed Iranian commandos in the water, Tehran would have proof. Proof they could use. If the U.S. captured them, the story could be controlled. But containment meant allowing them to stay close. Very close. Pause and comment. Would you order a strike or risk restraint? 231, a sudden jolt reverberated through the hull. Not an explosion. A tap. Metal on metal. Someone had made contact with the carrier. The Eisenhower, 100,000 tons of steel, had just been touched by an enemy operative. In that instant, dozens of sailors understood how small they really were. Below the waterline, sensors detected a magnetic anomaly. Something had been attached. Not a mine. Not yet. A device without an explosive signature. The worst kind. But second plot twist. Back aboard the Eisenhower, U.S. technicians isolated the object using remotely operated vehicles. It wasn't a bomb. It was a sensor package, passive. Listening. Designed to map the carrier's acoustic signature at close range, something Iran had never achieved before. This was not an attempt to sink a carrier. It was an attempt to make future attacks possible, and that realization changed everything. Hit like if you felt your heart racing just now. 234, the Combat Direction Center shifted from defense to intelligence collection. Every sensor aboard the Eisenhower was now focused on one question. How many? Sonar operators listened for breathing regulators, propulsion units, anything metallic. Thermal cameras swept the water in infrared. Magnetic anomaly detectors mapped the hull section by section. The answer came slowly. 4 divers? Maybe 5. All within 30 meters of the ship. Captain Reeves stood at the center of the bridge, arms crossed, watching the tactical display update in real time. Around him, officers waited for orders that hadn't come yet. "Where's their exfil?" he asked. The intelligence officer hesitated. "Unknown, sir. No surface contacts within 10 kilometers. That was the problem. Iranian commandos didn't swim 350 nautical miles from the coast. They came from somewhere closer. A submarine, a disguised fishing vessel, a submerged platform no one had detected, which meant the exclusion ring had already been breached, not just by divers, but by their support infrastructure. And that meant the threat wasn't isolated. It was coordinated. 237. In a locked compartment 3 decks below, a SEAL team finished suiting up. No one spoke. Weapons were checked in silence. Rebreathers tested. Knives secured. The mission brief had been clear. Disrupt, recover, minimize visibility. No shots unless unavoidable. No prisoners unless tactically necessary. No escalation unless forced. This was not a kill mission. It was a message. The team leader, Lieutenant Derek Hastings, looked at his men and nodded once. They moved toward the water access hatch without a word. Washington, D.C., 1914, Eastern Time. The president had made a decision. Not strikes, not arrests. Silence. The order was precise. Recover the device. Disrupt the Commandos' exfiltration routes. Leave no bodies. Leave no proof. If Iran wanted ambiguity, the U.S. would give them something worse. Uncertainty. Because the cruelest response wasn't retaliation. No, it was letting your enemy know you saw everything and chose not to respond at all. 241. The Iranian commandos had no idea they were being tracked. Their mission had gone exactly as planned. Device attached, no alarms, no confrontation. Now all they had to do was leave. The lead diver checked his wrist-mounted compass and signaled to the others. They began moving away from the hull in a tight formation, descending slowly to avoid thermal detection. 30 meters, 50 meters, 75. At 80 meters, their communication system went silent. Not broken, jammed. One of the divers froze, tapping his earpiece. Nothing. He looked to the others, but their faces were obscured by masks and darkness. Then the water pressure shifted. Something large was moving below them. Not the carrier. Something else. Comment below. Would you take the same decision? Let's discuss the strategy. 243. The SEALs entered the water without lights. They descended in pairs, moving with the kind of precision that came from thousands of hours underwater. No bubbles, no noise. Just controlled, deliberate motion. Lieutenant Hastings' heads-up display showed the positions of all 4 Iranian divers. They were clustered together now, disoriented, trying to re-establish communication. He raised one hand. The team stopped, waited. The Iranians didn't know they were being watched. Not yet. Hastings wanted to keep it that way as long as possible, because uncertainty was a weapon. And right now, it was the only one he needed. 246. One of the Iranian divers noticed the shadow first. A flicker of movement in the periphery. Something that didn't belong? He turned, was scanning the black water but saw nothing. Then it appeared again, closer this time. He signaled to the others, frantic now, pointing into the dark. They turned as one and froze. 6 figures, silent, surrounding them. No weapons raised, no threats issued, just presence. The lead Iranian diver understood immediately. They had been allowed to complete their mission, and now they were being told without words that leaving was no longer guaranteed. 248. The standoff lasted 11 seconds. No shots, no contact. Just 2 teams of combat divers suspended in black water, watching each other. Then Lieutenant Hastings made a gesture. Slow, deliberate. He pointed up. The message was clear. Surface or we make you. The Iranian lead hesitated. His orders had been explicit. Complete the mission, avoid engagement, return undetected. But undetected was no longer possible, and engagement was one wrong move away. He made the only choice left. He signaled his team to ascend. Slowly, the Iranian divers rose toward the surface, hands visible, weapons holstered. The SEALs followed at a distance, close enough to act, far enough to allow dignity. This was not capture. It was escort. 251 breaking the surface should have brought relief. It didn't. The Iranian commandos surfaced to find nothing. No extraction vessel. No support platform. No lights on the horizon. Their ride was gone. And in that moment, they understood. The Americans hadn't just jammed their communications. They had intercepted their exfiltration. Whoever was supposed to pick them up had either been warned off or was already gone. Lieutenant Hastings surfaced 10 meters away, mask still on, watching. He didn't need to say anything. The Iranians were stranded, not lost. Stranded. There was a difference. Lost meant they didn't know where they were. Stranded meant they knew exactly where they were and had no way out. Subscribe to see moments the world almost lost control. 2:54. The Iranian Commandos floated in open water, scanning the horizon for any sign of rescue. None came. Their rebreathers had maybe 40 minutes of oxygen left. The nearest Iranian territory was over 300 nautical miles away. Swimming wasn't an option. Waiting wasn't either. One of them reached for his sidearm, not to fire but to signal distress. Lieutenant Hastings raised one hand. The gesture was universal. Don't. The Iranian diver paused, then slowly moved his hand away from the weapon. Good. Yeah, because the next decision would determine whether this stayed quiet or became an international incident. 2:57, a U.S. Navy helicopter appeared on the horizon. Not a gunship. A rescue bird. It hovered above the water, rotors beating the air into white foam. A spotlight swept across the surface, illuminating the 6 figures below. A loudspeaker crackled. Remain still. Do not resist. You will be recovered. The Iranian Commandos exchanged glances. This was not how they had expected the night to end. Not dead, not captured in the traditional sense, but controlled, completely. 3:02. They were pulled from the water one by one. No restraints, no hoods, no roughness, just efficient, professional handling. Once aboard, they were separated. Not interrogated, just isolated. Blankets were provided. Water offered. No one spoke. Because everyone understood what this was. Not an arrest, a statement. The device had already been recovered. The mission had already failed. Now the only question was what happened next. And that decision wasn't theirs to make anymore. 3:19. The water was empty. No prisoners were taken, officially. None were reported lost, officially. The Iranian Commandos would be returned quietly through diplomatic back channels no one would ever discuss. No charges, no trials, no press conferences. Just silence. Because Iran had learned how close it could get. And the United States had learned something colder. That sometimes the most brutal response is letting your enemy know you saw everything and chose not to respond at all. Tehran, 11:47. Local time inside the guarded facility west of the capital, senior officers reviewed the mission logs. The sensor data had been transmitted before the device was recovered. Not all of it, but enough. Enough to map the Eisenhower's acoustic signature at close range. Enough to improve future targeting algorithms. Enough to call the mission a partial success. But the cost was clear. The Americans had allowed them to succeed. Just enough to know they had been watched the entire time. That was the message. Not deterrence. Domination. Washington, D.C., 2034 Eastern Time. The President received the final brief in private. No casualties. No escalation. No public incident. Device recovered. Commandos returned discreetly. Strike group resuming normal operations. Did we win? The National Security Advisor asked. The President didn't answer immediately, because winning wasn't the right word. Winning implied a contest. This had been something else entirely. A reminder. That power wasn't just the ability to destroy. It was the ability to choose not to, and make sure your enemy knew it. February 4th, 2026, dawn, the USS Dwight D. Eisenhower cut through calm water as if nothing had happened. No damage, no delays, no public acknowledgement. Iranian state media said nothing. So did Washington. But inside naval intelligence circles, February 3rd, 2026 was marked quietly. Not as the day war almost started, as the day it almost became inevitable, because Iran had proven it could touch an American carrier, and the United States had proven it could let them and still win. That asymmetry, that psychological edge, was worth more than any missile strike. It was the kind of victory that didn't need to be declared. It just needed to be understood. And on both sides of the Gulf, in quiet rooms where decisions were made, it was. History almost snapped here. Subscribe to see moments the world almost lost control. Comment: did the U.S. act right?